I want to talk to you, take you on a little journey today for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Talk to you about one of the things that I really struggled with in terms of my faith and thinking scientifically, since I was kind of a science-oriented guy in school and went on to study about the eye and become an eye doctor. So without further ado, let me talk about this journey. In order to talk about Einstein's theory of relativity, we first have to understand relativity in terms of the way that Galileo described it early in the 17th century. And Galileo did some thought experience similar to this. Newton built on it later when he came after Galileo. But he talked about looking at a sailboat from a person observing this, an observer on shore, and the wind is blowing the sailboat at 30 miles per hour in this direction, and there's a crew member on that sailboat who's walking 3 miles per hour in the opposite direction. So I think we would all understand and come to the reasoned assumption that the relative speed of this person walking this way but moving this way would be what? 3 minus 30 minus 3, 27 miles per hour would be the relative speed for an observer looking at all this on a shore, wouldn't it? So in order to understand these physical properties of objects in uniform motion, Galileo said that what is relative in this setting is the speed. The constants are time and distance. And this is not so difficult to grapple with or to understand, but it becomes very interesting when we look at what happened later in the 19th century, when, based on the work of Helmholtz, who discovered who really delved into the electromagnetic spectrum. Do you know what the electromagnetic spectrum is? I don't know that I did. That is all of the visible light rays and those waves of electromagnetic energy that are ultraviolet or too short to be seen, and the infrared electromagnetic spectrum, which is the waves that are too long to be seen, microwaves, television waves, radio waves. All this energy is called the electromagnetic spectrum. And Helmholtz described and began to understand that relativity was different for the electromagnetic spectrum, which we will refer to as light from now on, even though visible light is a narrow aspect of the electromagnetic spectrum. But he discerned that relativity was different in the electromagnetic spectrum, and Einstein thought about this when he was 16 years old in 1895. I don't know what you folks are thinking about when you're 16 years old, but I wasn't thinking about that. I was probably thinking about, when is the next basketball game, or am I ready for my science or math test, or what's that new freshman girl's address, or whatever it was. But it certainly wasn't thinking about what would it look like if I was riding on the edge of a beam of light. This is the thought that Einstein had when he was 16 years old. 10 years later, he answered that question with the equation E equals mc squared. Now bear with me, it's going to get exciting. I hope I'm not boring you too much at the moment, but in this equation Einstein described the energy necessary in thinking about light, the mass involved in light, and the speed of light squared, so that what he was able to discern was that if you tried to visualize riding on the front of a wave of light, you would never be able to do it, because in the electromagnetic world, in the electromagnetic spectrum, the constant is the speed of light. How does that work? No matter how fast you move to try to catch up to the speed of light, it's always the same. It's always 300,000 kilometers per second, or 186,000 miles per second. Huge numbers. And so what happens in space and with light travel is that time and distance change to keep the speed of light the same. Whew. Can your mind fathom that? Mine can't completely fathom it, but what I know is Einstein did. And what it means is that if we're standing on Earth and looking at a spaceship traveling at half the speed of light, that time is actually dilated on that spaceship so that time moves slower and distance decreases. Now let's correlate that back to the statement from 1 John chapter 1 verse 5 where it says God is light. Well, we realize, if we just take one more little thought piece here, that in space and light travel, that there's this fourth dimension called space-time. So that if I'm not moving at speeds approaching the speed of light, all of my movement is through time. But if I'm moving close to the speed of light or at speeds approaching that, now much of my movement is through space and my movement through time decreases or slows down. So that at the speed of light, time is dilated to what? Are you with me? Dilated to eternity. So Einstein was actually able to contemplate and to discern and understand a physical property of light that is in keeping with one of the Bible's truth claims about the nature of God. In Luther's Small Catechism on page 121, it talks about qualities of God being the nature of things such as God is eternal, He is immortal, that God is omnipotent, He's all-powerful, and God is omnipresent with scriptural basis to support those truth claims. And so here we look at Einstein's contemplating of the physical property of light as it exists in our world, and we find it supports the truth claims that God says about His nature. I find that to be amazing, that I struggled with being able to contemplate these things, but Einstein was able to understand them, and in so doing actually discovered that they supported what the Bible says about God. We talked about the eternal nature. Let's do two more things. If we think about the speed of light and the way relativity works in Einstein's brilliant description of it, he described that in order for a substance of any mass to be accelerated to the speed of light, first of all, that could never happen. It's not capable of happening, but theoretically, if it could, the mass of that object, the inertial mass, as it was accelerated from, let's say, 0.97 c, that's 97 hundredths the speed of light, all the way up to the full speed of light, 1.0 c, that inertial mass would become infinite. What is the correlative, the correlation of an infinite mass? It is omnipresence, isn't it? It's everywhere. That God is light, and the nature of light is that it could be omnipresent everywhere in our lives. There's nowhere we can go and escape the presence of God. And that by the same token, if an object of mass could be accelerated to the speed of light, which is not possible, but if it could, the amount of energy necessary to make that happen is again an infinite amount of energy. So God's claim to be omnipresent, omnipotent, all-powerful, all-present, and eternal are supported by Einstein's description of the nature of light. For me, as a young person who was told I had to suspend my rational mind and take everything on faith, I found this to be a powerful testimonial to the factual basis of the truth claims in the Bible. So young people, I just ask you in your faith journey, first of all, we know that faith is not just about scientific facts. It's not just about verifying the facts in the Bible. It's about living your life. It's about God meeting you in the troubled spots. It's about those God moments when you can't explain it by anything other than being touched by the power of God. But it also is not meaning you have to suspend your rational mind. You can open up your mind and ask these questions. God can handle it. He can handle the factual basis that you might need to have to support some of those truth claims from the Bible. And I wish you peace and success as you investigate the truth claims of God in the Bible.